Morning, afternoon or evening, wherever you are. I'm Paul Clark and welcome to my studio. So what have I got for you lovely people today? So this is a request from a viewer, so many thanks Abby, who said that she'd like to see a painting of Durdle door. So what am I talking about? Durdle door? Well, it's a natural limestone arch found along the south coast here in Dorset in the UK. So we're going to have a go at painting this lovely seascape with Durdle door. So come and join me and we'll paint this step by step together. Okay, so here is the photo reference which I got from Pixabay. Today's materials. My paper is some lovely thick Saunders Waterford. It's 300 rough, 100% cotton, but of course any decent watercolour paper will do. And my colours are cadmium yellow, yellow ochre, cobalt blue, Prussian blue, burnt sienna, burnt umber, sap green and some Payne's grey. And for my brushes I'm using a large Seascape brush, and from my range a 3/4 inch flat, number 12 and number 6 round, and of course my trusty number 3 rigger. And the pencil drawing, as always, is free to download from my website, a link in the description below. Off we go, and starting with the Seascape brush and wetting the complete sky area with clean water. And being as accurate as I can to follow along the straight edge of the sea. Now it's probably a good idea to draw that in with a ruler. We don't want any wonky seas. Now my plan is to make a little more interesting sky than the one in the photo, so I'm starting off with a very watery yellow ochre, using my flat brush and straight into the wet. Then I'm using a sort of purpley colour, just simple little diagonal strokes again into the wet paint. And then with a nice watery cobalt blue. So keep these washes nice and light. If you find that once it's dried it's still a little bit too light, then you can put another layer on top, but you can't lighten a wash that you've painted that's too dark. Okay, so while I'm waiting for my sky to dry, I'm moving on to the beach area here, and I'm starting with a nice watery wash of yellow ochre. Then I'm going to be dropping in various colours into that wet wash. I'll list them all below. I do like to use my large flat brush when I'm covering big areas like this beach. So next we have the issue of preserving the white waves. Now I usually try and avoid masking fluid if I can, but I think in this case it's going to make painting that sea so much easier. And if you're going to be using a brush, make sure it's an old one and clean it straight away. Or you could dip your brush in some soap or some fairy liquid. Does fairy liquid translate internationally? Other washing up liquids are available. So I've made sure my sky is totally dry, then I'm running some clean water in the whole area of the sea. And a flat brush is ideal for getting that nice straight line. Okay, so for my sea colour I've mixed in some Prussian blue because I just felt the cobalt blue was too warm on its own and I wanted that slight turquoise feel to it. and I'm increasing the strength as I move towards the beach. And I'm adding in this yellow ochre burnt sienna mix to give the illusion of shallow water. And it's important to note that I'm not trying to match the colours of the photo. And here I'm dropping in a really strong consistency of the same colour that I painted the sea to give the impression of the reflection from the rock above. Now, I could have masked out that rock area, but that's just too much of a faff. So what I'm doing here is just taking a clean tissue and just lifting off the colour. Now, it's obviously important that you do this while the paint is still wet. Ooh, just fill in that little bit of sea area in the middle first, then finish off lifting out. Next, I'm just painting in that little area where the beach is still wet. Next, with a mix of cobalt blue and Payne's grey, I'm painting in this little land mass here in the distance. Now I think this is the Isle of Portland, which isn't really an island as it's connected to the mainland by a strip known as the Chesil Beach. Now I could be wrong, so if there's anyone watching from Dorset, please let me know. Next, using my number 6 brush and a very watery mix of cobalt blue, I'm just suggesting a few little ripples in the sea, but only here in the foreground. Okay, next for the rocks and the door itself, and I'm starting by just dropping in some clean water. Then I'm going to be adding in lots of colours straight into the wet, and I'll list them again below. And here there's just the suggestion of a bit of vegetation growing over the top, so I'm adding in a little green. So next I want a light sort of rocky texture, so I'm taking a sheet of cling film, scrunching it all up and then laying it flat directly onto the wet paint. Then I'm pressing it down and manipulating it just to get some nice grooves and texture. Now I did use this technique to good effect in a similar painting I did a couple of years ago, link above if you're interested. So next what I do is lay a book on top. Oh look, it happens to be Watercolour by Paul Clark. Anyway, press it down and probably wait for about 15 minutes. Then carefully lift it up, peel off the cling film, and hopefully you should get a nice random effect. And I wanted this to be quite subtle because really it's just the base for my rocks. So now we need to let this totally dry. So it's a perfect time for a short break. And believe it or not, a glass of Durdle Door Ale. Brewed in Dorset, you know. Okay, so now that's dry, I'm now coming in with some detail on Durdle Door itself. So I'm starting with some of this green vegetation, and I'm going to be using as much as I can the dry brush technique, which should pick up some texture from the rough paper. And it's really the perfect technique for getting that illusion of rocks. Lots of nice random texture. And I'm using this dark value shadow to give me the shape of the lighter rock below. And here you can see I'm really using the brush on its side to pick up the texture of the paper. Next, I'm using a piece of plastic credit card to scrape out and drag to give me the shape of some of these rocks. Then back in with my brush to increase some of the contrast. Credit card again, and it really is a great technique for getting those lovely rock shapes. So, a little bit about Durdle. It sits on a 390-foot isthmus and is a natural limestone arch on the Jurassic Coast in Dorset, so named as it spans 185 million years of history and is famous for the wide range of fossils found there. It's a World Heritage Site and countless films and music videos have been filmed there, including the classic Far from the Madding Crowd. And Dorset-born missionary and poet Arthur Mule wrote these lines in 1879. Shall the tide thus ebb and flow forever and forevermore? Rave the wave and glance the ripple through the rocks at Durdle Door. Right, moving on. So next, for these little ridges of stones on the beach, what I'm doing is I'm using my number 12 brush, just lightly painting in but then smudging along with my finger. So it's important that these lines don't look too obvious. That's why I'm leaving plenty of gaps and plenty of smudging. Back to my number 6 brush, and I'm just beginning to paint in a few little details into the rocks. Now, I'm a big advocate of less is more, so it's always difficult to judge how much detail to actually put in, especially when you compare it with the photo reference. So I think here I'm just on the cusp of overworking these rocks, so I really have to say to myself, enough now, Paul, he says as he's continuing to put in that last bit of detail. Next, just covering up the top as I just want to splatter in a little bit of texture in these foreground rocks. Just tapping against my finger a fairly full brush of watery burnt umber. Okay, so now for the foreground here, which should help to give the painting a little bit of scale and depth. So I'm starting again with some clean water, just to make sure the paint continues to move. And then I'm dropping in most of the same colours I've used so far, and I'll list them all below. So these splats are going in while it's still damp, so I get a nice soft mottly edge. And I'm adding in here a few blobs of clean water, which hopefully will produce some interesting effects with a little background. Next, back of my brush, the wooden sharpened end, I'm scoring and scraping in to create some little grass effects. Next, I'm just taking a very few granules of table salt and sparingly sprinkling it into the wet wash. Don't overdo it. So now that's dry, I'm now splatting in a few hard edge dots with some burnt umber. And here I'm just putting in some rocky and grassy details which will help to link the beach to the foreground. Next, I'm using my trusty number 3 rigger just to paint in a few blades of grass. Just lifting off with each brush stroke to get that nice tapered end. Next, I'm just taking a rubber eraser and carefully removing the masking fluid. Next, I'm taking my magic scalpel, okay, it's just a cheap craft knife, and I'm just scratching into the paper just to get some fine detail sparkles, especially on the end of each patch of white. Okay, so the masking fluid covered up a few bits of the bank here, so I'm just going to lay a few blades of grass over top. Now I think these white waves look a little bit prominent, so I'm just taking a very watery cobalt blue and just tickling in a little bit of colour on the bottom edge. Mixed media time, and I'm just taking a yellow-green pastel pencil just to flick in a few light coloured blades of grass. And how about a few little yellowy wildflowers just using a soft pastel. There we go, all done, and this one in just over 3 hours. Well, I hope you enjoyed that as much as I did, and you'll give it a go. Remember, make it your own, let those watercolour paints flow, have fun, and always enjoy the experience. And I've just heard that we've got a few remaining spaces left on our river cruise along the Rhone in beautiful France through the Provence. Just a lovely tour. That's this August. Check out details in the description below. And in the meantime, please don't forget to like, subscribe if you haven't already. It is free. Leave a comment. I do read every single one. Can't always reply to them all. And of course, I look forward to seeing you all again next week for another Watercolour Wednesday. Have a great week. Cheers now.